Family. Welcome to the Practical Purpose Podcast, Friday, Fireside Chat. We're here. Go on and like, share, subscribe. Let some people know we're here. We're in the dungeon. We're here. Go on and like, share. All right, let some people know we're in the dungeon. We're in the dungeon tonight, Friday, Fireside Chat. You hear my voice. Got my tea. Brought to you by Western Governors University. Had a good day. Hope everybody had a good week. Took my kids to the fair. Took my family to the fair today. So it was interesting how much things have changed just walking around the fair. Like just seeing how things have changed at the fair. It's not the same as it was kind of growing up. Prices have changed. Rides have changed. Even the amount of rides that they have changed. Like it's not a whole lot for the kids like it felt like when we were kids. So I get the same thing when I go to the fair. I didn't have a question of the day today. Don't have a question of the day, but I just came up with one. So when you go to the fair, what is the things that you get to eat? Like, what do you eat from the fair? What's the best thing you get to eat? What's your favorite meal, your favorite food to get from the fair? Me, I get the same thing every year, but I switched it up this year. I get the Greek gyro, and I normally get a funnel cake. But this year, kids want to try these donuts. So I got the donuts. So I'm switching it up next year. I'm not going back to funnel cakes. I'm done with funnel cakes. What is in the chat? Let me know, what is your favorite thing to eat when you go to the fair? Put that in the chat. Favorite thing to eat when you go to the fair. Polish dog. I see that. Never had it. We did have the fixed fries. We did have the fries. They were good. Elephant ear. There we go. Oh, yeah. I see my guys. You played, though. Savage season. Savage season. Let me shout out my friends, my brothers on their podcast, Be Easy and V Keys. They have a podcast. I'm going to try to find a picture right there. There it is. They have a podcast called You Played, Though. It's a college football podcast. So if you're into college football, go check them out. You Played, though. Now, they're Clemson fans, but they give analysis on all the teams. They give analysis on all the things going on in college football. It's the You Played, though podcast. Look for it on all streaming devices, on all platforms, YouTube, all platforms. You Played, though. That's my guys. Those are my guys right there. Those are my guys. All right, I got some more comments. Here we go. Corn dog, French fries, lemonade, bread, day, everything. Okay. Yeah. Then they have this thing now at the fair. I don't know if they had it before, but if you go during lunchtime, like if you go at 11, but you leave before 2 o'clock, you get your money back. So I was running my kids through them rides. They were riding everything between 11. Well, the rides didn't start till 12. And so they were riding everything. And at 1:45, we was at the gate trying to get back out, get our money back. And we got it all back. Yeah. So the fair is fun. If you have children, make sure you take them to your local fair when it comes. During the daytime. Don't take them at night. Take them during the daytime. Sadly, the world we live in is not always safe. when it gets dark, right? And that kind of segues us right into what we're going to talk about tonight, which is fear. And if you look in our world right now, you see that our world is based on fear. The news media, everything that's pushed to you is fear based, and that's for a reason. Now, there are a lot of things going on in our world that causes us to be fearful, and some things should cause alarm. I mean, if you look at what's going on right now across the way in Israel, if you look at all of these things that's going on, this should cause us to pause, right? But the way our world is designed, it's designed to place fear in our life so that we can't be progressive. We're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about where fear comes from, right? We're going to talk about the consequences of fear. And we're going to look at practically first how you can manage it, right? How you can combat fear. And then we're going to look, the second half of the show, we're going to look at biblically, how can we combat fear in our life? Because many times what you may be struggling with is not necessarily anxiety. You're struggling with some fears that you don't want to face. And because you don't want to face them, you don't have the ability to be progressive. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight on the show. Stay tuned.
1, 2. Yeah. 1, 2. We living life with a practical purpose, making every day worth it. Live from the dungeon, we go deeper than the surface, leading with wisdom from the street to the churches. Searching, what seeking you find? We speaking right to your mind. The sun ain't fighting to shine, no diamonds either. Light hit the Jews and turn fools to believers. Steady making moves and teaching truth to the leaders. Use all these tools just so you can supersede us as is. Yeah. Say 1, 2. Yeah. Say 1, 2. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about fear. Let's talk about fear because fear has the unique ability, oftentimes more than any other negative feeling, any other negative emotion. Fear has the ability to cause us to be still. Right? Fear has us the ability to not, it affords us the ability to not progress, right? And oftentimes fear will cause us to be paralyzed in our placement. And when we are paralyzed in our placement, we're not able to be progressive and to move forward. So as we kind of talk about fear, I want you to think about some things that you may be fearful of. I want you to think about some things that may be causing you to not progress in your life or not be all that you're supposed to be because of fear. All right, I want you to think about the things. Prophetess Smith, I see you. We've been praying for you too. All right, here we go. Fear. So there are two types of fear, right? There's good fear and there's negative fear. There's bad fear. All right, good fear is the fear that you hear in the Bible when it says that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. That's respect and reverence. That's not being afraid, right? That's respect and reverence. But we're not talking about that fear tonight. We're talking about the negative fear, which is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, right? And oftentimes that looks different in every person's life. You're fearful of some things, and because you're fearful of them, you're scared to take the next step. Mark Twain says this. He says, courage is the resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not the absence of fear. And so often we feel like these negative emotions or these unpleasant emotions, we're supposed to just eradicate them. But there are some emotions that you just don't get rid of. They don't go away. You have to learn how to manage them. They're going to come. They're going to be present in your life, but you have to learn how to manage them. And tonight we're going to just talk about where they come from, why it's important to face them, and how you know how to manage them in a practical sense and in a spiritual sense. Because you have to address your fears if you're going to manage them. You have to address your fears if you go to management. I think last podcast we talked about the fact that whatever you're scared to address, you can't work on, you can't fix. So you have to acknowledge when things are not where they should be if you ever want to move forward into fixing. I'm going to say that again. You have to acknowledge the way things are in your life, even if it's not right, if you plan on fixing them. And that's a part of life. In the church world, they call that sanctification. Like you're constantly trying to figure out how to get better, right? It's not a one-time thing, right? You're constantly figuring out how to get better. And in our lives, if you're not in a constant pursuit of wanting to be better than you were, yesterday, there's a book on my shelf right over here called Atomic Habits, and it talks about being 1% better every day. Just 1% better. 1% better. We were in a staff meeting, and one of the teachers, she challenged everybody. She said, hey, I want you to go back to your classroom and write down how you can be 1% better tomorrow. And I wrote down that my 1% is that the next day I want to know more about my students than I knew the day before. I want to be able to call all of them by name or some characteristic about them that we share, that we have talked about, right? So that 1% better in our lives causes us to constantly be progressive. And that's the key to life. The key is not to be standing in the same place. In fact, I'm going to talk about a little later the fact that success is measured by movement. It's not measured by being still. We're going to talk about that. All right. So fear, where does it come from? Why do we have it? There are a few reasons. We are taught to fear. Fear is a learned behavior oftentimes. Think about growing up. And sometimes it was for good reason. Your mom may say, don't cross the road or don't go near that water. And innately, subconsciously, what you did was you associated bodies of water with danger. And so because you have done that, it may have taken you a longer period of time to learn how to swim or to go near the ocean or to go near lakes and rivers because you were taught to fear. And sometimes fear in our life is a learned behavior. We've seen people be fearful, and because we've seen them be fearful, we become fearful. Right. One thing that I've talked to even my wife about is the fact she's scared of spiders. Right. She's scared of spiders. And when the children are around, she will show that fear of spiders the same way she would if she was by herself. And one thing that I talk about is what that has done to our children to a degree is it causes them to be fearful of spiders. Well, it's the same thing with me. I'm fearful of cats. And when cats come around, I do the same exact thing. And so oftentimes fear is a learned behavior that we pick up from being taught, or we're taught intentionally or unintentionally as we grow up or as we have life experiences. PK and Tan says she don't like spiders either. Listen, another place where fear comes from, or another reason why we have fear, is our own imagination. Oftentimes, our imagination can conjure up things that are not reality, and it causes us to be fearful. Have you ever just been so pessimistic you thought about the worst thing possible and it didn't even come close to what that possibility was? And you had created so much fear in your heart, in your mind, based off of the power of your imagination. And our imaginations are powerful. When I think of imagination, I don't just think of like Walt Disney and Disney World and those type of things. Your imagination gives you the ability to shape your future. Your imagination actually is how you move from day to day. You don't travel anywhere unless you've already visualized how to get there. That's your imagination. And oftentimes we put ourselves in fearful situations, or we put our mind in a fearful mindset because we've conjured the worst possible scenario in our life based off of the power of our imagination. Listen, so it comes from what we were taught. It comes from learned behaviors. It comes from our imagination. Here's another one. It comes from ignorance. I don't mean ignorance as in you're dumb. I mean ignorance as in you don't know. And this is powerful and this is critical, especially in church circles, right? And I'm not talking about church tonight, but in church circles, oftentimes because we've taught the wrong thing, we've caused people to live in fear. We've taught the wrong thing. We've misunderstood the text. We've misunderstood what God was saying in His Word, and because of that, we've taught people to live in fear. We've taught people that you can be saved on Tuesday and you sin on Tuesday night, and so you're not saved on Wednesday. And the Bible doesn't teach that. And people live in fear because of the ignorance that has been projected upon them. Oftentimes we live in fear because we don't take the time to acknowledge or to seek out our fears so that we can correct them. And so we're innately living in ignorance. We're living in ignorance. And that ignorance brings about fear in our life. Right? So it comes from ignorance, it comes from imagination, it comes from what we are taught, learned behavior. Prophet Smith says ignorance, a big one in church circles and in the schools. It both. Because we have been taught things, and you can be taught things in ignorance, but the person was well-meaning. They just didn't know, or they knew enough to get them to a level, but they don't know enough to take it to the next generation. Right. And that's one of the problems in schools, is that it takes a different level of understanding to be able to educate this generation. It takes a different level than it took to educate my generation. And so if you're not operating in a level of knowledge, then you're going to be operating innately in ignorance, and you're going to do damage to yourself and other people. You're going to cause yourself to be fearful. Another place fear comes from is fear comes from doubt. And I'm not going to really deal with that one a whole lot, but fear comes from doubt. When you doubt yourself, when you doubt who you know you are, when you doubt something that God says, or when you doubt something that someone who you have entrusted and believe in says, it brings about a level of fear, and it also brings about a level of distrust. Right? Because if I doubt what you said to me, then I also have a fear that I may not be able to trust you the next time. Right? And so fear comes from learned behaviors we're taught or that we observe, comes from our imagination, comes from our ignorance, and it comes from doubt. Listen, you have to address these fears, because fear has consequences. Fear has consequences. What are some of those consequences of fear? You can see them in your everyday life. One of the consequences of fear is that fear divides our mind, right? And James says that a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. So if you're unstable, if you have a divided mind, you're not able to move and operate the way you're supposed to. PK 10 says stagnation. And we're going to get to that. You jumping ahead of me. OG, my God. One consequence can be regret. Right. And regret, OG, is one of, I used to tell my basketball players, the worst thing to live with is regret. Knowing that you didn't do all that you could have done in a certain situation is the worst thing to live with. And when you operate in fear, you can't operate in fear and operate in 100% excellence at the same time. You can't do them both. And so a consequence is regret. You live your life later, you look back in retrospect, and you say to yourself, had I not been afraid, I would have been able to do this, that, or the third. Right? So it divides our minds. It makes us unstable. Here's the second consequence of fear is that it paralyzes our progress. Fear paralyzes our progress. It makes us indecisive. We can't make a decision about anything because we're scared of so many things. And oftentimes that comes from thinking too far in advance and not thinking in the moment. When you're always thinking about all the possible all the possibilities that can come from a decision, oftentimes you're not being as rational in the moment as you could be. Listen, you have to always be willing to address that fear so that you're not indecisive. Listen to this. We miss opportunities because of fear. Fear kills more dreams and opportunities than failure. Let me say that again. Fear kills more opportunities and dreams than failure. Skinny, it kills more opportunities and dreams than failure does. Listen, and it is because you're so fearful that you won't step out of the boat. You're so fearful that you won't step out of the box. You're so fearful that you won't take a step in the direction that you're supposed to go. And because of that, you can never reach your dreams. You can't reach your dreams. You can't maximize opportunities because you're fearful. Because you're fearful. Here's another consequence of fear is fear enslaves us to uncertainty. We don't look at what is constant in our life, what we know is going to be there, what I like to call the big jokers, those things that's always going to win that book. If you play spades, you know what I'm talking about. Those things that's always going to be consistent. We don't focus on those things because we're enslaved to uncertainty because of fear. You're uncertain not only of those big jokers in your life, you're uncertain of yourself. You don't believe that you can be as successful as you're supposed to be. You don't believe that you can prosper like you're supposed to prosper. You don't believe that you can be as effective as you're supposed to be because you're operating in fear in your life. Listen, so it divides our minds. It paralyzes our progress. It enslaves us to uncertainty. Listen to this one. It blocks our growth. Fear blocks our growth. All right. And so what it does, he said spades is overrated. Fear blocks our growth. What fear does is fear causes us to not be able to move and to grow and to progress because we're stifled. Listen to this. Fear is an enemy of your growth. And oftentimes it's not just a fear of failure, it's also a fear of success. Yet one of my fears, and it's storming outside. One of my fears is a fear of success. Like, what am I going to do if I'm actually successful at this? If I'm actually good at this, how am I going to respond? How am I going to react? How am I going to operate and function? So fear of success and fear of failure are enemies to your growth. They are enemies to your growth. They will stifle you. And if we've agreed that success is measured by movement, then you don't have the luxury of being stifled and being successful. Success is measured by movement. What are you moving? Right? Is your family moving forward because you're leading them? Right? Is your job moving forward because you're there? Are people moving because of your presence? Right? And if you're operating in fear, you're not moving anything because you're paralyzed. You're paralyzing your own progress. Fear paralyzes us and causes us to stay in the boat. We're going to get to that, but it causes us to stay in the boat. Pecan 10 says fear of failure. Yeah, fear of failure. It's critical. Here's the last consequence of fear is fear affects your health, your mental health, your spiritual health, and your physical health. See, you can look up, go on Google, and you can find that fear can be the cause of hypertension, can be the cause of cardiovascular disease, can be the cause of so many things in your life. Fear can affect your mental, physical, and spiritual health. Ms. Smith says, I've had to help many young people understand it's okay to succeed. They were afraid to be the first one to graduate. Yeah, fear of success. And see, our kids, this generation has that a lot because they really don't understand what success really is. right? And it's difficult concept, but success is what I do compared to what I've been called to do. It's not what I do compared to what someone else does. And so if I've been called to operate on a certain level, if I've been purposed to operate on that level, I'm successful when I operate on that level. And that looks different for everyone. All right. So the consequences of fear are is the fact that it divides our minds, it makes us indecisive, it paralyzes our progress, it makes us uncertain, it blocks our growth, and it affects our health, our holistic health. So how do we combat fear in the practical sense? Brought to you by Western Governors University. In the practical sense, how do we combat our fear? How do we manage it? Let me give you a few ways. Number one is you have to acknowledge your fears. Unaddressed fears become limits. Let me say that again. Unaddressed fears become limits. You put yourself in a box when you don't address whatever you're afraid of. And so often we think about fear from a physical standpoint. I gave the example of spiders and cats, but sometimes fear has nothing to do with that. Sometimes fear is based on a something that happened in your life previously that you've never dealt with, or a person that did something to you in your life that you've never dealt with, and now you have a fear every time you approach anyone like that person, right? And so if you don't acknowledge that, then you don't have, or like I said on the last podcast, you don't make yourself eligible to fix it. So the first way that you kind of manage your fears is you have to acknowledge it. Here's the second way: you have to be thankful. Yeah, you have to be thankful. Listen, when you start to focus on how good things go or how good things are in your life, no matter how bad it may seem in the moment, when you start focusing on those big jokers, on those things that's constantly going well in your life, on those things, on the fact that you are even alive, right? On the fact that you have a job to go to, if you do, on the fact that you have, like the old folks say, the activity of your limbs and all of those things, when you begin to focus on being thankful, right, then what it does is it diminishes how much you focus on your fear. Right. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the way that you magnify success is to focus on the things in your life that are successful. Right. You focus that. That don't mean you eliminate everything else, but you focus on what's causing you to be successful. And then that makes those negative things in the grand scheme of life, that makes them so much smaller. Right. So you have to be thankful. Here's the third thing. You have to talk to a trusted individual or a professional. Folks don't like to hear that. Sometimes you got to sit down and talk to somebody about what you're fearful of. Sometimes you got to sit down and talk to somebody. Listen, and you need to talk to somebody that's not going to just be your yes man. It's not just going to tell you, oh, it's okay, and blah, blah, blah. You need to talk to somebody who's going to say, what action are you putting in place to address this? Listen, thinking itself doesn't overcome fear. Action does. Thinking itself doesn't overcome. Just because you change the way you think, that is the first step. You still got to put in some work. Just because you constantly say, I'm not scared of this, I'm not scared of this, don't mean you're not scared of it. You got to put in some work. And so often, especially as African Americans, especially as African American males, especially as African American male Christians, we don't want to go talk to nobody about what we're fearful of, because we think that that makes us less of a man, or we think that that makes us less of a Christian, right? But you have to go talk to people that have your best interest at heart, that will help you fight, face, and overcome your fears. Talk to somebody. Here's another thing you can do to combat your fear, to manage your fear, is think long term. Think long term. What do I mean by think long term? You have to be in the moment, but you have to recognize that this time next year, I don't want to be in the same position this time next year that I'm in now with regard to my fears. I want to have made some progressive steps in my life to combat those things in order to overcome whatever fear that I may have. Fifth thing that you can do is educate yourself on your fear. Listen, you acknowledge it, then you have to educate yourself on it. What is it? Why am I fearful of this? What happened? Like with cats, with me, I can remember growing up, nobody ever had a cat. And I don't remember my grandparents, nobody having a cat. I can remember walking down the street and seeing cats all the time. And they were so sneaky. But then I remember this instance where I pulled up to my wife's apartment one night, and you know how your headlights turn and you see everything in front of you, and it was like 50 sets of eyes looking back at me, and they were all cats. Because in an apartment complex, people start feeding them, and then they come from everywhere. It was all cats, and I was terrified. I was terrified. So to this day, I'm terrified of cats. I won't go around cats. Right. But I understand, I've educated myself. I've looked back over my life and I know where that fear has come from. Right. And so I'm more equipped to address it because I know where it came from. I've educated myself on it. Right. The sixth thing you can do in a practical sense is to visualize success. Visualize success in that area. Listen, if I have a fear of failure, you visualize yourself being successful. Visualize it. My fear of success is based on the fact that when I want to make sure I'm in the right headspace when I am successful. I want to make sure that what I'm successful at, I'm mentally prepared to deal with it, because success is a tough thing. You have so much weight that comes upon you when you're successful, and if you're not ready to handle that, I want to be ready to handle that. So I have a fear of success that I have to deal with, and it doesn't mean that I haven't been successful. It means that sometimes in my life I haven't been prepared for the success that's been afforded to me, and so because of that, I've created a fear of success. Right? That's just a transparent moment. And the last thing about a practical way that you can manage your fear is being willing to pivot. Be willing to say, I was going in this direction. Now, because I've educated myself, because I know what I need to do, I need to pivot and go this way. And that's a daily thing. One secret to progress is managing fear daily. Not once a week, not once, twice. Every day when you find yourself in a situation where you are fearful, you learn how to manage it step by step. It's not a one-time thing. It's not a one-time thing. Fear has crippled so many of us because we, number one, have not been willing to acknowledge and address it. But number two, when we've seen it, we have not been willing to pivot and go a different way. And that is so true of so many things in our life. So many people have failed because they haven't been willing to pivot. And sometimes you've got to pivot from a way of thinking. You've got to pivot from a belief that you may have had that has been proven and shown to you that it's not right. You've got to be willing to pivot if you want to be successful in that area. All right. Listen, if you're afraid of something, admit it and deal with it. If you're afraid of it, admit it and deal with it, because you can't progress if you don't do that first. Right? When fear dominates us, we can't progress. When fear dominates us, we cannot progress. Listen, so as we talk about the practical side of these things, the key, number one, is that you've got to acknowledge it and understand that you are fearful of something, and whatever that is, you educate yourself on it, and then you begin to take progressive steps to move forward. Right? So that's the practical side of it. And you know how we do on the Practical Purpose podcast. We give you the practical side, and then I try to find it somewhere in the Bible, some principles about whatever the topic is in the Bible, so that you have a sure foundation, right? Because no matter how practical it is, no matter how much I may say it, the Bible is a sure foundation, right? Even more so than research and all those other things, right? And fear is something that has crippled people or paralyzed people since the beginning of time. If you look in the Bible in Genesis chapter 3, the very first recorded conversation that Adam has with God, God says, Adam, I was looking for you. He said, I heard your voice and I was afraid. That's the first recorded conversation we have. Adam said he was afraid. And ever since then, one of the emotions that comes upon us in difficult situations, one of the first emotions is fear. And so we're going to deal with it. There's a place in the Bible, a story that's recorded that you all know, that we're going to dissect very quickly. It's in the book of Matthew, chapter 14, right? And Peter, this is the story that's only, I believe, is only recorded by Peter, where Jesus is coming across the water, and Peter walks on the water. Let's look at it. Here's what it says. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it is a ghost. They cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. And Peter answered him, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. He said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O ye of little faith, why did you doubt? Right? So it's three things here. It's three antidotes to fear here. It's three things that we can do here in the text that help us to manage our fears. Very quickly, three things. Here's the first antidote to fear, and the first two may be very obvious to you, but the first antidote to fear is the word. The word is an antidote to fear. Where do we see that in the text? It's right there, I believe, in verse number 29. He said, come. Jesus gave him one word that was enough for him to do something miraculous. I'm going to say that again. He didn't give him a whole speech. He didn't give him a whole set of chapter and verses. He gave him one word that was enough for him to do something miraculous. That was an antidote to his fear. Everything we need to manage fear can be found in the word. This is why if you call yourself a believer, you call yourself a Christian, but you don't ever pick up to read the Bible, you're depending on someone else to tell you what it says. You're going to struggle with so many things in your life, because the word is designed for us to digest. It's designed for us to read for ourselves. And we find ourselves in so many predicaments and problems due to ignorance, because we've heard what someone else said and we didn't get into it for ourselves, right? Everything we need to manage fear can be found in the word. Listen, God may speak a specific word for a specific situation in our lives. Listen, that's amazing that all he said was come. And we're going to get into what happened mentally with Peter, but all he said was come, and that was enough for a miracle to take place. That was enough for him to walk on what everyone else sinks in, just because he had one word. He had a word. And you got to be careful of who you listen to. You got to be careful of the things that people speak in your life from people that you may reverence if it doesn't align with the word. That's why I'm real weary of people who call themselves prophets. I'm real weary of that, because if what you're saying don't align with what's in the word, something is wrong. And you got to be careful of who you listen to and who you allow, because oftentimes, see, when I was raised, oftentimes, especially in the church circles, you were raised on fear. You were told if you don't do this or do that and do this and do that, you going to hell. That was how we were raised in the church. And so once you start learning the word for yourself, then you can put yourself in a position to overcome fear. Listen, Isaiah 41:10 says, I will strengthen you, I will uphold you. Talking about fear when you're fearful. That's a promise. That's in the word. And if you know anything about the word, you know fear doesn't come from God, right? Paul said God hasn't given us what? Put that in the chat. Fear doesn't come from God. All right. So when we are in that emotion of fear, of being scared, of being in a position where we feel danger, that emotion is not something that comes from God. So that means God has to empower us or help us to defeat it or to overcome it. Right? That's right. God has not given us the spirit of fear. I see it. I see it. You went to Sunday school. I see it. All right. So the first thing, the word is an antidote to fear. Here's the second thing that we see. Faith and works are antidotes to fear. Peter did not only believe what Jesus said when he said, come, Peter acted on it. Peter acted on it, right? Now, we don't know. When you read the text, it makes it seem like Peter, as soon as Jesus said, come, Peter jumped out the boat. We don't know how fast it happened. What we do know is that Peter got out the boat. Here's a simple truth that's not deep. Peter got out of the boat before he walked on the water. Simple. He got out of the boat. See, the problem with many of us is we're so focused on trying to walk on the water, we won't get out the boat. It's a simple truth. You claim that you're gonna be a millionaire, but you haven't even created your LLC yet. Right? You gotta get out of the boat. And there's a lot of mental preparation that it takes to just get out of the boat. Listen, walking on water was a miracle. Getting out of the boat was also one. And so oftentimes we're so focused on what we perceive to be the biggest thing that we don't take the first step. And Peter got out the boat before he walked on the water. Peter did not just hear the word, he acted on the word that he heard. If you're going to overcome fear in situations in your life, you can't just hear what the word says. You can't just hear what God is speaking to you. You've got to act on it. James says, don't be just a hearer of the word, be a doer of it. So you have to act on what it says if you're going to overcome fear. Listen, your works must be done in faith. As long as he was in faith, he was walking. Your works, what you do, must be done in faith. Sometimes we can do good things, but not do them in faith. Sometimes we can do good actions, good works, but not do them in faith. If you're going to overcome fear, you've got to attach your works to faith. I think it says that the children of Israel, I think it's in Exodus or maybe it's in Hebrews, that they didn't get where they were supposed to go because they didn't mix what they were doing with faith. You've got to not only hear it, you've got to do it. Here's the third thing. First thing was the word is an antidote to fear. This is on the spiritual side, not on the practical side. Faith and works are antidotes to fear. But here's the last thing that you may have missed. Focus is an antidote to fear. Look at what it says here in I think it's verse 30. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. When he saw the wind, you can't even see wind. The conditions when he stepped out of the boat were the same as when he was walking on the water. The conditions at which when he was walking on the water and when he actually got close enough to Jesus for him to reach down, it was the same. The conditions never changed. What changed was his focus. The conditions didn't change. His focus changed. And we hear that all the time. When you hear that, you always hear it from a spiritual sense. As long as your eyes are on Jesus and this and that and third. But the key is whatever you focus on magnifies in your eyes. Whatever you focus on becomes larger. So when you remove your focus from the things that you should be focusing on, then fear can creep in and cause you to falter. And that's what happened. That's what happened was the conditions didn't change. His focus changed. The conditions were the exact same. But when your focus begins to shift, and oftentimes this is why this is a daily practice. That's why that whole sanctification is a daily practice. When you've got to daily become focused on what it is you're supposed to be doing, because when you're not, you're going to begin to sink. Whatever you focus on magnifies. Let me say that again. Whatever you focus on magnifies. Take a week and focus on the positive in your life. Take a week and instead of fussing at your husband, fussing at your wife, fussing at your kids, focus on the positive, the good things that they're doing. Just do it for a week. And then you'll watch and you'll be able to understand that you have a lot more to be grateful and thankful for than you thought you did. And fear, what fear does is it causes us to focus on our insufficiency and not on our sufficiency. And when you focus on the fact, when Peter started focusing on the fact that, hold up, I ain't supposed to be walking on this water. He looked at the conditions, which were the same conditions that he saw. And here's another interesting point. He was closer to Jesus when he began to sink than he was when he was in the boat. And he still allowed the conditions to cause him to sink. When you start focusing on circumstances that are negative, conditions that are negative, conditions that may not be productive, then what you begin to do is you begin to allow fear to creep in. And when fear creeps in, what does it do? It paralyzes us. And he couldn't take another step. And he began to sink. Listen, there are many theologians that will tell you, based off of the text, that he actually walked a good ways before he began to sink. And oftentimes we become our most vulnerable selves when we're at the height of our success. Let me say that again. We become our most vulnerable selves when we're at the height of our success. And that's because we get so comfortable with what we're doing and we don't realize that what we're doing is miraculous. And because we don't realize that it's miraculous, we become susceptible to fear. Because I'm not supposed to be doing this anyway. Listen, I'm not. My principal, he tells this story all the time. How he grew up in the hood, and when he became a teacher, people treated him like he was a superstar, right? And he says that, man, from where I came from to be a principal, from where I was born and where I came from, listen, I ain't supposed to be doing this. But because of that understanding, he knows that I've got to operate in excellence because there's so many people who have these same aspirations. And oftentimes we don't operate in excellence because we allow fear to take over what we're doing. We lose our focus. Listen, Peter, the word is an antidote to fear. Jesus gave Peter a word. Faith and works is an antidote to fear. Whatever it is you're fearful of, find out what you believe and then begin acting on it. And then focus is an antidote to fear. What are you focused on? How can you shift what you're looking at? Magnify what you're looking at. That's why David says what? Oh, magnify the Lord with me. We say that all the time. We don't know what that means because God can't get bigger. So what does magnify mean? Magnify means, what David is saying that, is that the more I focus on him, the more, to me, he becomes bigger in my life, bigger in my situation. He don't get no bigger, but my focus on him causes him to seem bigger in my situation. And the more you're focused on one thing, you're not focused on other things. And that's critical to overcoming fear. Now, what I don't mean is that you can just let things go that's not right. You have to deal with them. That's why I said first thing you have to do is acknowledge and address it. But your focus should not be where you're magnifying fear or magnifying negativity. You should be magnifying, in the spiritual sense, you should be magnifying God. In the practical sense, you should be magnifying the things in your life that are going well, that you're doing right, that people are doing right in your life. Magnify those things. Isn't it? So I was watching a podcast. This was yesterday, and Shannon Sharp and Chad Johnson, and Tyreek Hill said some things about Shannon Sharp, and Shannon Sharp said that Tyreek Hill was one of the greatest. He's like the most exciting player in football right now. And Tyreek Hill's response was, that's not what he said 2 years ago. And Shannon Sharp came back and said, in the era we're living in, if you don't say something positive about a person every time you speak about them, then their perception is negative. He chose to focus on what Shannon said 2 years ago that was negative, not what he's saying right now. And so often we conjure up in our imagination things in our mind based off of so many things that have happened negatively in our past instead of focusing on where we are now. And you got to deal with those negatives, but your focus should be on how am I going to progress in my future as it relates to fear. All right. So here's your homework. Here's your closure. Here's your homework. First thing I want you to do is identify what you're afraid of. And do this holistically. Like what physically are you afraid of? I told you I'm afraid of cats. The physical things you're afraid of may not necessarily be that important, but it gives you a reference point and a time to physically practice some of the principles, right? Identify what you're physically afraid of. Emotionally, what are you afraid of? Some of us are afraid of certain relationships. Some of us are afraid to be in a relationship. Some of us are afraid to not be in a relationship, right? Emotionally, what are you afraid of? What do you fear? And then spiritually, what do you fear? Some of us fear death. Some of us fear getting an illness that we can't recover from. Some of us fear a lot of different spiritual things, right? And I want you to identify some things that you're afraid of. Now, I don't want you to make an exhaustive list, but I want you to identify some of the things that you're afraid of, right? Acknowledge it, and then I want you to study why you are afraid of. Because I guarantee you, if you track back why you have certain fears, they're going to go back to those points we made at the beginning. They were taught to you. They were learned behaviors that you saw or you were taught, or they're just things that you've conjured up in your mind to make yourself afraid of in your imagination, right? And so I want you to identify those things that you're afraid of. I want you to acknowledge it. And I want you to ask yourself, take some time to study why am I afraid of these things in all of these different aspects of my life, whether or not it's spiritual, physical, or emotional. Why am I afraid of them? And begin the process of fixing those things, learning to manage it. Pecan Tan says, I missed a whole bunch of comments, and it will help you realize if it's a legitimate fear or not. Right. It'll help you realize. And you go back to the example of Peter. Peter being fearful to walk on the water is legitimate. But think about it. He did it. And theologians will tell you he probably did it for a little minute. And he allowed Jesus said, why did you doubt? We didn't even get there. But he allowed that doubt, what he saw around him, to cause him to doubt in what he was already doing. He doubted in what he was already successful at doing. Fear crept in, and he sang. He began to sing. And so yeah, you need to understand if it's legitimate or not, but you can't understand that until you acknowledge it. What am I fearful of? Some of us need to go to the doctor. We fearful. We may not want to go because we don't know what they're gonna say, or we may not want to go because we think it's an indictment on our strength. Some of us need to sit down with our children and have some conversations, but we're fearful, right? And if those fears are legitimate, you got to deal with them. Because here's the last thing: when you don't deal with your fear, it impacts how you're able to deal with other people. Let me say that again. When you don't deal with your fear, it impacts how you're able to deal with other people. So other people are suffering because you won't deal with what you're afraid of. You can't be a conduit of peace, of success, of joy if you're afraid to deal with what you're fearful of. And until we recognize that we have fear, we need to manage our fear, because we are not walking out what we're supposed to walk out for other people in our life, because we can't do it and progress because we're paralyzing our progress because of fear. You got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. So that's your homework. Identify holistically what you may be afraid of. Study why you're afraid of it. Figure it out. Why am I? Track it all the way back as far as you can. Why am I afraid of these things? And then begin that process of taking those progressive steps to handle those things, to fit in the practical sense and in the spiritual sense. Biggest one is here in the practical sense. Some of us need to go talk to somebody about it. And you need to do that, because there's no way you can be the best father, the best husband, the best wife, the best mother, the best son, the best daughter, the best niece, the best nephew, the best professional that you can be while you have unaddressed fears. Why? Because unaddressed fears become limits. Listen, my cuz, Lord, I'll be doing homework all weekend on this, afraid of everything. Oh man. Yes, Lord, I'm helping myself. Listen, so I want you to do that. I want you to also share this to someone that you know. There's someone you're thinking about right now that you're like, man, every time we talk, they scared of something. Or they the type of person that I always say they like Bone Crusher. They ain't never scared, right? They that type of person. Sit this to them. Let them watch it. Let them get a realization, because sometimes some of the things that you have been trying to say to them, they'll take it differently from someone else, right? And some of these things you may have been trying to speak in other people's life before, right? So share this out to as many people as you know. It's the Practical Purpose Podcast. Again, go see my brothers, Be Easy, V. Go see them. I try to put it back on the screen, and I click on it. They podcast. You Played No Podcast. Go check them out. And we'll be back in a few weeks. Back in the dungeon. Practical Purpose Podcast. Y'all be good.
Enjoy the podcast? Listen, like, share, and subscribe. Go to YouTube, Basic Wisdom with Dr. Brian Williams, and subscribe to the channel so that you will know anytime something else is coming out. Did you know that Basic Wisdom is comprised of 3 different components? We do practical life teaching. That's what you see on the Practical Purpose Podcast. We do professional development. We come out and we train people. Doesn't matter what industry you're in. Doesn't matter what type of organization. We come out and we do professional development. And listen, if you want to go to the next level in any area of your life, you need a coach. We do leadership coaching at Basic Wisdom. Go to the website, basicwisdomllc.com. Tap in, because it's something there that can bless you.